I'm sorry, can you repeat that? I asked, blinking like I didn't just hear my entire career get doused in gasoline and lit with a smug little matchstick smile. Evan didn't even look up from his tablet. Your numbers are unusual, he said, dragging out the word like it had dirt under its nails. Could be an anomaly. Maybe a backend patch someone else pushed. Either way, bonus eligibility requires sustainable metrics. Collective synergy, not solo outliers. There it was, the sentence that made my ears ring and my throat close up like a bad allergic reaction. 63% reduction in latency. Error rates down to single digits. 4 years of obsessive weekends, missed birthdays, and enough caffeine to stop a horse's heart, and this Red Bull-stained MBA just erased me with a phrase he read in an airport business magazine. Across the table, a few of the other execs looked down at their hands, their coffees. Anywhere but at me? One cleared his throat and said something about team alignment. I didn't hear it. I was too busy watching my dignity pack its bags and sneak out the emergency exit. I stood up slowly, took off my badge, clean, deliberate, and set it down on the table like a poker chip. No raised voice, no snarky comeback, just a quiet end to a very loud betrayal. And hey, before we get too deep in this corporate horror show, if you're one of the 95% listening without hitting that little subscribe button or tapping like, come on, do it for the team. We may not get bonuses either, but it really helps us keep the lights on and the pettiness flowing. Anyway, the room was still silent when I walked out, not because I'd made a scene, but because I hadn't. And that scared them more. Let me rewind a bit. The system, my system, was a Frankenstein of legacy code duct taped together by 3 decades of interns, consultants, and people who'd long since moved on to better paychecks or padded resumes. When I got there, it was already on life support. No docs, no version control, just chaos and a bunch of Excel sheets with names like do not delete this one final V2. So I rebuilt it. Quietly. Methodically. The kind of obsessive that made HR politely suggest boundary setting workshops. While the rest of the department was busy playing agile charades and ordering lunch on the company card, I was buried in dependency maps and system calls at 2 a.m., debugging things no one else even knew existed. And I wasn't looking for glory. I just didn't want to live in daily fear of another 2-hour outage because some subroutine got cranky and took the whole billing module with it. But Evan didn't see any of that. Evan saw bullet points, headshots, his own reflection on Zoom calls. He was hired 3 months ago, fresh from some buzzword factory where disruption meant gutting every process that actually worked and replacing it with branded nonsense. First thing he did? Can the old team leads, renamed the dev squads to impact clusters, and started every meeting with a slide that said, "Let's go hunting," like he was auditioning for a leadership cult. When I showed him the report, complete with before and after load times, CPU metrics, user impact breakdown, he squinted like he was reading hieroglyphs. Feels a little isolated, he muttered. Did you run this through alignment protocol? What protocol? I asked. He smiled. Exactly, I knew then. Bonus wasn't coming. The recognition never arrived. The moment he read my name next to those stats, his brain filed me under threat. A system that worked too well in a woman who didn't ask permission to fix it. So yeah, I handed over the badge. No tantrum, no fight, just quiet clarity. Because what Evan didn't realize, what none of them had taken 5 minutes to ask, was that the system wasn't fixed by committee. It wasn't the result of synergy. It wasn't some magical patch someone else slipped in. It was mine. Built from memory, from muscle, from instinct honed through every midnight crash and early morning deploy. And more importantly, it lived in my head, not in Jira, not in Confluence, not in any pretty documentation portal that Evan could parade around during QBRs. When I walked out that door, I didn't just leave behind a job. I took the map, and I knew exactly what was going to happen next. By the time I pulled into my apartment complex that night, the story had already taken on a life of its own. Jennifer walked out, no notice, no handoff, no goodbye lunch, not even a LinkedIn update. Just whispers echoing through Slack threads and lukewarm texts that hit my phone like little digital shrugs. I sat in the driver's seat for a good 10 minutes, just watching the rain carve slow, greasy rivers down the windshield. Somewhere behind me, a neighbor's dog barked like the world was ending. Fitting. Inside, the apartment smelled like takeout and stress. My laptop was still open from the night before, a half-finished YAML file blinking back at me like it was confused we weren't at the office. Or maybe I was confused. You pour years into something, actual years, the kind that eat your 20s alive, and then it ends in a 5-minute meeting and a smirk. The first text that came in was from Raj, one of the backend guys I used to sync with on deployments. Heard what happened. Sorry, that's just messed up. 2 minutes later, wait, did you really not leave anything behind? Then Chloe from QA, so Evan said you quit cause you couldn't adapt to the new structure? I told him to shove it, for the record. Adapt. Cute word. Gets tossed around when people want to blame you for not playing dumb. But the one that stuck was from Mel, the only person who ever stayed late with me during system rollbacks. It just said, "You built that thing from scratch, they'll all see." I stared at her message for a long time, not because it made me feel better, but because it reminded me why it hurt. I didn't just build the system. I was the system. Every cron job, every endpoint, every obfuscated variable name nested 10 levels deep in a function chain, that was me. I turned chaos into logic and logic into reliability. I didn't need Jira tickets to track what I already carried in my head like a second heartbeat, and now I had to let it go. So I did what anyone would do after being erased. I got to work. I started backing up my personal files, tax stuff, receipts, personal scripts, not work product. Nothing they could scream IP violation about, just the scaffolding of a life they clearly never saw as valuable. I shut down my remote access tunnels, deactivated my repo keys, revoked the one lingering admin token from a dev box no one had touched in 18 months. But then I hesitated. There was one old script, an ancient thing I wrote in my second month on the job. It wasn't fancy. Just a legacy watchdog that pinged critical services and left little breadcrumb logs in a secured sandbox directory. We used to call it Cerberus because if anything started acting weird, it barked. I opened the log file, line after line of green check marks, timestamped like a neurotic diary. OK authenticated heartbeat 2025 to 10 to 2802, 1704, and then one line nestled at the bottom in clean white text. Info auth expired. Redirection pending. I didn't write that message. Not recently anyway. It was part of an old test scenario I'd forgotten even existed. An internal joke, really. When the system couldn't validate the core architect's token after X days of an activity, it triggered a cascading permission shift. A harmless little quirk, unless someone tried to override it. I closed the terminal, didn't touch a thing, just let it sit. That night, I slept like someone had pulled the batteries out of my anxiety. Not because I was okay, because I wasn't carrying it anymore. Let Evan spin whatever bedtime story he wanted. Unfit for collaborative leadership? Sure, let him believe it, but I knew the truth, and more importantly, the system did too. Evan strutted into the Monday morning stand-up like he'd just landed a SpaceX rocket with one hand and a latte in the other. He clapped his hands together. All right, team, fresh week, fresh structure. Jennifer's transition left a few things open-ended. But that's why we're here, right? To level up. Let's dive into mapping her infrastructure. Jared, Sam, you two are my gotas for this. Get started today. Jared blinked. Sam shifted in his chair. They were both less than a year out of college, still wearing those hopeful expressions that hadn't been beaten out of them by system logs and 4 a.m. rollback disasters. I'd seen that look. Hell, I used to have that look. The two of them retreated to the war room, formerly known as Conference B, with whiteboards, sticky notes, and enough cold brew to drown a mongoose. 10 minutes in, Sam asked, "Where's the documentation?" Jared replied, "I thought it was in Confluence." They opened it. Two folders, one labeled skeleton and the other simply "Here be dragons." The contents: a few timestamp notes, references to internal scripts, and a variable list written in what looked like shorthand Latin. They tried following a naming convention. That was cute. Most of my variable names were practical but unorthodox. Echo Goblin, Subterrarium, Witchlock, don't ask, it made sense in context. But without the context, my context, it read like a deranged scavenger hunt from a paranoid AI. Even the comments were cryptic. Things like // if this breaks, yell it past me, I dare you. // feed the watchdog or it bites. // this isn't a bug, it's a dare. By noon, Jared looked like someone had just explained mortgages to him using interpretive dance. None of this makes sense, he whispered. Evan poked his head in. How's it going? Sam rotated his laptop to show him a dependency map that resembled a Jackson Pollock painting. We think this might be part of the load balancer logic, or maybe telemetry, or authentication. Honestly, we're not sure. Evan squinted, then waved dismissively. She overcomplicated everything. Classic lone wolf syndrome. We'll rewrite it better. Cleaner. Use standard modules, modernize the stack. Shouldn't take more than a sprint. They nodded because what else do you do when the man signing your paychecks is high on his own ignorance? But outside their little silo, in the quiet back alleys of the system, something else was stirring. You remember that script, Cerberus? It didn't just watch, it waited. Deep inside its belly was a calendar trigger tied to my employee credentials, specifically, a deferred lockout mechanism set to execute exactly 72 hours after final authentication expired. It wasn't malicious. It didn't delete anything. It didn't crash anything. All it did was revoke. Quietly, surgically, like a ghost turning the deadbolt from the inside. At 3:41 p.m. on Wednesday, the trigger executed. Several admin tokens were flagged dormant. Permissions on the schemer registry updated silently. A webhook pinged the monitoring channel, but no one noticed because it didn't fail. It just shifted. If you looked at the logs, really looked, you'd see a line, notice primary auth node realigned, authority object unset. But no one was looking. They were too busy drawing diagrams that looked like tech startup fever dreams, trying to reverse engineer logic that had never been written down because it lived in the calluses on my fingertips. And as the day wound to a close, Evan stood in the kitchen holding court with HR about Phase 2 onboarding, bragging about how he was going to trim the fat and streamline the dev org for speed. He didn't notice the two junior devs sitting silently in the war room. eyes glazed. Whiteboard now covered in question marks and doodles of flame-engulfed servers. He didn't see Sam quietly Google what is an auth node, and he sure as hell didn't notice the logs whispering, line by line, that the system had just changed ownership. Not to someone new, but to no one. It started with a blip. That's how these things always start, like a single hiccup in a silent room, just loud enough to make someone glance up, and go right back to pretending everything's fine. Wednesday, 11:04 a.m. A routine sync between the billing subsystem and the internal audit ledger failed. No error message, just a lag, then another, then a dead stop. The pipeline that reconciled incoming invoices with vendor payouts simply didn't. The finance team logged a ticket, payment ledger discrepancies, manual validation required, harmless on its own. These things happened. Legacy quirks, right? By 11:37, someone from accounting was already calling IT, voice tight and annoyed. We're showing vendor overpays from last cycle. Something's off. Can we get eyes on the billing log? Sam and Jared scrambled. They located the billing module, or what they thought was the billing module, tangled in a web of nested triggers, abstracted logic, and a circular function chain that traced back to a shell script named Basilisk Pulse SH. Neither of them wanted to admit they had no idea what it did. After poking at it for 40 minutes and nearly triggering a failover loop, they called the ops manager. He patched it manually by bypassing the validation node entirely, a move that stopped the bleeding but killed the audit trail. Evan, naturally, blamed the code. He sent a breezy email to the C-suite before noon. Minor hiccup this morning, traced to an outdated module in the legacy codebase. We've got eyes on it, working on a full modernization sweep. Appreciate your patience as we push for scale. Not one mention of me, not that I expected it. At that exact moment, I was sitting cross-legged on the floor of my apartment, eating leftover Chinese straight from the box and staring at a job application portal on my laptop. The position was in Oregon. System architect. Full remote, six-figure salary, stock options, the works. The kind of role you only dream about when you've just been publicly erased by a guy who uses the word synergy like a threat. I had the whole thing filled out. Resume uploaded, cover letter sharp as hell. All I had to do was hit send. My finger hovered over the trackpad, and then I stopped. I don't know why. Maybe it was inertia. Maybe it was bitterness disguised as hesitation. Or maybe I wasn't ready to walk away just yet, out of habit. Muscle memory more than anything, I opened a secure shell to the admin console. Not the company-issued dashboard they gave us after some compliance seminar. No, my console. The one I built after the third time our ops monitoring flatlined and no one noticed for 6 hours. Encrypted, unlinked, invisible to everyone but me. It opened like an old friend. The UI was brutalist, charcoal background, lime green text, no styling, just raw numbers. CPU load, memory usage, service pings, and at the bottom, the heartbeat line. It used to pulse steady, like a metronome. 4 beats per second, sharp and clean. Now, it pulsed slower, hesitant. 3 pause, 1. Something was wrong, not catastrophic yet, but wrong. I leaned back, eyes narrowing. They'd triggered the lockout, that much was clear. The core processes were still running, but on limited credentials. Think of it like a spaceship on backup oxygen. It'll fly, sure, but not forever. The script that had patched billing, it cut off the automated ledger reconciliation, which meant manual oversight, which meant human error, which meant someone would notice soon. I stared at the blinking cursor in the Job Application tab. I didn't hit send, not because I wanted to stay, but because I wanted to watch. There's a particular kind of freedom in bitterness, kind that makes you sip your tea a little slower while Rome burns down the block. I wasn't sabotaging anything. I just walked away, closed the door, turned off the lights, and they'd started swinging a hammer through the walls without checking where the wires ran. I closed the console, didn't log anything, didn't fix anything. Just let it pulse, slower and slower, like a body waiting for someone to notice the flat line coming. The first real crack came Friday morning, not in the system, that had already begun its slow descent into limping dysfunction, but in the glass fortress of ego that Evan had built around himself. An email came in at 7:12 a.m. from Michael Delacroix, our coup. Subject line was simple, outage review billing module. No exclamation marks, no blame, no panic. Yet, Evan read it standing at his desk, sipping something overpriced with collagen powder and oat milk. He laughed quietly, then typed his reply like he was swatting away a mosquito. Standard legacy glitch, patch already deployed. Billing sync back online, no loss of data integrity. Expecting no downstream impact, he clicked send. Then with a performative sigh, he turned to Sam and Jared. Old codebase, Jennifer's masterpiece, held together with duct tape and wizard spells. We'll clean it up. Neither of them responded. Sam looked down at his keyboard. Jared rubbed his eyes like he hadn't slept. At 9:38 a.m., the reply came back, shorter, colder. You said Jennifer was junior staff. She's listed as primary architect on the internal ledger. Why wasn't that flagged during her offboarding? Evan froze, read it twice, then again. The email hit like a brick to the solar plexus. Primary architect, internal ledger. Those words weren't just a title and a file. They were a liability when he had overlooked. To be clear, the ledger wasn't public. It wasn't pretty, but it was real. A flat file database maintained by ops to track system dependencies, ownership, and escalation paths. You weren't listed there unless you had a hand on the engine. If something failed and names were needed, that was the list you wanted to be on, for better or worse. And there it was, buried in the fourth row of the main system architecture node. Primary architect, J. Barrett, escalation contact, terminated. Documentation link, N/A, that wasn't just an oversight. That was a gaping hole with a neon arrow pointing to Evan's desk. He started sweating. Opened the HR offboarding checklist. No mention of reviewing ledger dependencies. Opened the documentation index. Nothing but those two cursed folders, skeleton and here be dragons. He opened the company's Slack archive, searched Jennifer, and started reading his own words from the past week. She lacked alignment, didn't integrate well into the new model, unwilling to adjust to collaborative leadership. He looked like he was going to throw up. At 10:14, Delacroix called. Evan didn't pick up. Sent it to voicemail, then immediately regretted it. The COO followed with another email. I want a full dependency map by end of day. Include schema links, ownership trails, failover logic. If we lose vendor sync again, we're exposed on 2 contracts. That's a 7-figure problem. Evan, was anything deactivated when she left? Evan didn't know how to answer that because he didn't know what he didn't know. He'd never asked Jennifer for a handoff, never done a real exit interview, just smiled while she set her badge down and walked away. He'd assumed she was replaceable. That assumption was aging like milk in the Mojave. Meanwhile, Jared was furiously typing, pulling logs, trying to map out the database schema. Don't even know what half these tables do, he whispered. Sam chimed in, there's no rollback config, not even for the heartbeat module. Evan snapped, it's fine, we'll just rebuild. We don't need her documentation, we'll refactor. But even he didn't believe it anymore. Delacroix sent one last message. No subject line, no greeting. You're patching blind. If she's the architect and she's gone, then what we're running on right now isn't code. It's borrowed time. And for the first time since his smug onboarding speech, Evan didn't have a quip. He just stood there, quiet, pale, suddenly very aware that all those blinking dashboards he loved to parade around at meetings didn't mean a damn thing without someone who understood what they were built on. And that person was gone. No forwarding address, no backup admin, no map, just silence and a heartbeat slowing behind the curtain. The first alert came in at 2:13 a.m. Not a loud crash, not a system-wide scream, just a soft ping on the ops dashboard that said, Alert, core API auth dropped below minimum heartbeat threshold. Then another alert, payment recon process failed handshake at 02:13:46. And finally, alert, heartbeat registry, no response from primary node. A silent triple tap to the temple. The night shift lead, Marcus, rubbed his eyes, muttered something about false positives, and checked the console, but it wasn't a false alarm. The processes were still up, but they weren't talking. 2 core services, alive but unresponsive, like blinking mannequins behind glass. Marcus did what ops does, restarted the services, cleared temp memory, reinitiated the chain from a known good config. Nothing, no errors, no logs, just silence. He called Evan. It rang 4 times before a bleary voice answered, yeah? We've got 2 core processes down. They're alive but not authenticating. Heartbeats flatlined on the primary node. Evan groaned. Did you try rebooting? We did, twice. Same result, payment recon's dead. Auth tree isn't populating, looks like a permission hang. Evan was silent for a beat. Then he said, all right, I'll remote in. By 2:23, Evan was logged into the system from his kitchen, sweatpants and bedhead, staring at the same black void Marcus had been fighting for the past 10 minutes. He tried flushing the credential cache. No effect. He attempted a global override using the fallback admin token. Access denied, token not recognized. He opened the failsafe scripts. Nothing but stubs. They weren't even wired to the right nodes anymore. Some of the core logic had been abstracted months ago. He remembered Jennifer mentioning it in passing during a sprint review he didn't really listen to. Sam and Jared were looped in. Sam, blurry-eyed from whatever dream he'd just been yanked out of, mumbled, the heartbeat registry's looking for a user ID that doesn't exist anymore. What do you mean it doesn't exist? Evan snapped. It was tied to Jennifer's internal ID. When her account was deactivated, the registry lost its validation anchor. It's trying to call a ghost. Jared jumped in, scrolling through legacy scripts. Okay, what if we restore from backup? Just overwrite the heartbeat layer with yesterday's image? Evan nodded, do it. They navigated to the most recent backup node and initiated a restore. A progress bar loaded, then stopped, then spat out a message in a dull gray box, required auth node missing, schema link unavailable, credential path null. Evan swore under his breath. Jared blinked. Wait, the backup doesn't include the schema. Sam scrolled faster. It's blank after the authentication layer. No data. Just shell architecture. What do you mean blank? Evan barked. I mean someone designed it to look like it's backing up the system, but it's only saving the top layer. Everything below that requires a live key to decrypt. They all stared at the screen. Jennifer's name wasn't there, but her absence was. Every missing node, every null return, every blank schema, all of it whispered her name like a curse. She never shared the schema, Marcus said softly. Realization sinking in like ice water. And now, without it, they weren't just down, they were blind. The logs couldn't trace the dependency tree because the dependency tree wasn't mapped. It lived inside Jennifer's mind. No diagrams, no documentation, just a live system that trusted her key and no one else's. They tried cycling through old service tokens. None were valid. Sam said what none of them wanted to hear. The system doesn't recognize us. Not really. We're just squatting in it. Panic bloomed behind Evan's eyes. They'd been patching holes in the drywall without realizing the foundation was already crumbling underneath. He rubbed his forehead, voice cracking. Okay, we brute force the schema. Reverse engineer it, even if it takes all weekend. No chance, Jared muttered. This code, it's layered in encrypted containers. You crack one, the next layer requires a new key. It's recursive. Sam added, it's not just code. It's a signature. The system only trusted her. Evan leaned back in his chair, the hum of the server fans filling the silence. Somewhere something beeped. Another alert. Heartbeat paused, database disconnected. User access revoked. And all Evan could do was sit there, watching the pieces fall, realizing too late that the person he dismissed as a low-level engineer had been the architect of their entire universe. And she took the blueprints with her. By 4 a.m., the office looked like a crime scene that hadn't been taped off yet. Empty Red Bull cans littered the ops table like shell casings. Someone had unironically ordered pizza at 3:30, and it now sat half-eaten under the glow of a flickering monitor, grease soaking through a copy of the weekly deployment calendar. Jared was pacing, Sam had gone silent, and Evan, sweat-drenched and jittery, on his second call with a third-party dev shop he'd found through an old VC buddy. Yeah, we just need a team to patch in through the heartbeat gate. We lost the schema path, but the containers are stable. It's probably just an auth cascade, we need a clean bypass. How fast can you move? The voice on the other end was confident. Too confident. Give us 30 minutes. We'll drop in through an override protocol, run a shadow auth node, and repoint the dependencies. Done it a dozen times, Evan latched onto that like a drowning man to a broken oar. Do it. Bill whatever you need, just get it up. The team, contractors with usernames like Skunkworks Root and Bitefire77, VPN'd into the system like paramedics on cocaine. They didn't ask questions. They didn't even blink at the encryption layers, just went straight for the override hooks. Marcus muttered, "Is this even safe?" Evan barked back. Safe went out the window when Jennifer walked out. We're bleeding. We need this up before payroll triggers in 2 hours. The contractor sliced in, forcing synthetic credentials through the blocked schema nodes like battery acid through a rusted pipe. For a moment, it seemed to work. The heartbeat registry blipped back to life. A few green pings returned. Cheers, clapping. Evan exhaled like he'd just pulled the sword from the stone. See? Crisis averted. We just had to move fast. Agile thinking? That's why we need flexible orgs, he said to no one in particular, already mentally drafting the postmortem email he'd send to Delacroix before sunrise. Then came the beep, short, sharp, followed by a terminal window popping open across 3 workstations. One line, no timestamp, no signature, no log ID, just final event architect user decommissioned. Core access null. A silence fell across the room. Sam stopped mid-sentence. Jared stared at the screen like it had just confessed to a murder. Marcus whispered, "What the hell does that mean?" No one answered. Then the lights flickered, not the physical ones, system lights, dashboards, admin consoles, real-time monitoring. One by one they stopped refreshing. Evan clicked his mouse. Nothing. Sam reached for the console, locked. Jared tried pulling up the service map. The screen froze halfway through loading, then black. One by one the systems dropped. Internal chat. Dead. Billing offline. Customer portals 404. Dev environments terminated. VPN disconnected. At exactly 5:04 a.m., the last heartbeat signal went flat. The core went cold. The system flatlined. Across the network, a silent auto-destruct. Not an explosion, a blackout. No corruption. No breach. Just absence. The kind of absence you only get when the thing holding everything together lets go. Sam said it again. Slower this time. What does it mean? Jared finally answered. It means she was the architect. He turned, eyes wide, and we just pulled her ID. No one moved. Even Evan didn't speak. The last thing the logs captured before access evaporated was a secondary message, barely a whisper in the noise, no failover path found. Core functions require trusted signature. The room was quiet, not calm, just stunned. Hollow, somewhere in the distance. A fan kept spinning inside a server rack that no longer had a purpose. The pizza box collapsed in on itself. And Evan, still gripping his now pointless laptop, just stared at the lifeless console, lips parted like he might say something to save himself. But what do you say when you've just erased the one person who wasn't replaceable? When you didn't just break the machine, you deleted the soul that ran it? No one had the answer. All they had left was silence, and a system that no longer remembered their names. At 6:12 a.m., the elevator dinged. No warning, no text, no on my way Slack message from someone halfway across the country. Just the sound of steel doors sliding open and the COO of the entire company, Michael Delacroix, stepping into a battlefield of glowing monitors, half-asleep developers, and the unmistakable smell of stale coffee and panic. He was still in his tailored slacks, but the shirt under his wool coat was wrinkled and untucked. His tie looked like it had been loosened in the car. His face, usually tanned and unreadable like a guy permanently negotiating a yacht deal, was ghost pale. He didn't speak right away, just stood there, scanning the room. Sam stood up slowly. Jared looked down at his shoes. Marcus held his tablet like it might deflect a bullet. Finally, Delacroix's voice broke the silence, low, hoarse but sharp enough to split bone. Tell me she wasn't the sole architect. No one answered, not because they didn't want to, because they couldn't. Jared tried. We thought there were backups, but everything past the heartbeat requires her signature. The schema's recursive. It folds back on itself unless you know the entry points. Sam added, voice cracking, and the backups don't restore without the original validation path. They look normal, but they're basically hollow shells. Delacroix walked slowly toward the ops table, where Evan sat stiffly with his hands clasped in front of him like a child waiting for detention. Did you know she was listed as primary? Delacroix asked, eyes locked on him. Evan opened his mouth, then closed it again. Finally managed a strangled, it wasn't in the official org chart. The org chart? Delacroix echoed, a twisted smile creeping onto his face. You think tech architecture lives in a PowerPoint? He turned to the war room whiteboard, covered in frantic scribbles and red string logic that made less sense by the hour. Walked over. Tapped the word someone had written in the corner, failover plan. Then he picked up a manila folder sitting on the edge of the table, the only folder no one had dared to open. Jennifer's. The one she dropped off with HR 2 days before leaving. No one had bothered to read it. It was passed around like a prop, assumed to be some polite offboarding checklist, maybe a W-2 and an exit interview form stapled together. Delacroix opened it. Inside, nothing, except a single sticky note, written in blue ink in the corner of an otherwise blank sheet. If you're reading this, it's already too late. He stared at it for a long time. Didn't move, didn't blink. Just stood there, the folder hanging open in one hand like a joke with no punchline. Then, finally, he sat down slowly into one of the ops chairs. Not the boss chair, not the ergonomic throne he normally occupied in the corner office. Just a basic plastic roller seat, like he didn't trust himself to stand anymore. He put the folder on the table, face down, and whispered, "We just lost the entire stack." No one breathed because they all knew what that meant, not just the systems down. Gone. The stack, the beating, breathing, modular core of the company's operations wasn't just unresponsive. It had rejected them. It had recognized Jennifer's departure as final. It had treated her deactivation like a power cut to the motherboard. And the worst part, it had done exactly what it was designed to do. Jennifer hadn't left a bomb. She'd built a vault. And when she walked away, she took the key and let the door seal shut behind her. Not malicious, not vengeful, methodical. Delacroix ran a hand through his thinning hair and looked at Evan one last time. You let her leave, he said, flat and cold. Without an interview, without a review, without a trace. Evan tried to speak. Failed. Delacroix didn't wait for an answer. He just leaned back in the chair, closed his eyes for a moment, and exhaled like someone coming to grips with the fact that the house they'd been living in for years had actually been balancing on one matchstick. And the match was gone. By 7:45 a.m., Legal had taken over the ops floor like a crime scene unit stumbling onto a body with a name tag. Two attorneys, one with a Bluetooth headset permanently embedded in his ear, the other clutching a notepad like a rosary, were firing off questions at Evan while IT attempted, for the fourth time, to mount a remote volume that no longer existed. Do we have her personal number? Did she sign any NDA post-separation? Where's her last known contact point? The HR director, visibly sweating through her linen blouse, muttered, We sent her a thank you email. She never replied. Legal flipped open a printed exit packet and scrawled something aggressively under the words employee exit interview declined. At 8:10 a.m., someone finally tried the most obvious thing. They picked up the phone and dialed. Jennifer's number, her old extension, rang twice. Then, the number you have dialed is no longer in service. They tried her cell. Same thing, not even voicemail, just absence. That's when Sam, bleary-eyed and running on nothing but vending machine coffee and raw dread, opened his laptop and checked LinkedIn. Her profile was there, updated. A new banner image, mountains, clean air, the kind of view you don't get from a WeWork conference room. Underneath her name, the headline now read, Jennifer Barrett, Remote System Architect Independent, and the location? Boulder, Colorado. She'd moved, started over, rebranded. No mention of the company, no passive-aggressive commentary. Just a soft re-entry into the world on her own terms, like she hadn't just dropped a billion-dollar enterprise into a digital black hole. Meanwhile, across the country, in a small coffee shop off Pearl Street, Jennifer sat at a window bar with a cup of black coffee and a chocolate croissant she'd finally taken the time to enjoy. Her laptop was open, but not for work. A soft guitar instrumental played in the background. Her screen showed a clean, empty desktop. No alerts, no bug reports, no Slack notifications, just peace. She took a sip, eyes half closed, watching the orange-pink sunlight melt across the Rockies like something sacred. Her phone buzzed once. Email, subject, Systems Architect Opportunity Equity and Signing Bonus. She didn't open it, she didn't need to. Another buzz, a voicemail transcription preview. From Michael Delacroix, COO Jennifer, if there's anything we can do to fix this, please. We didn't know. She stared at the screen. Her thumb hovered over the screen for a second, then she turned the phone off. No words, no revenge post, no justification, just silence. The same silence that had spoken volumes in that meeting room when she handed over her badge and walked away. The same silence that now echoed through every dead server, every locked-out console, every null return. The same silence that answered Delacroix better than she ever could. Because some things don't need a reply. Some lessons only come after the crash. The screen fades to black, and Jennifer? She just keeps sipping her coffee. You're the real MVPs of the office jungle. Thanks for watching. Smash that subscribe button, or the coffee pot might just forget your next brew.